Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SavvyCast. This is Jamie, and I'm so grateful that you're joining us, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Thank you for being here today. I am thrilled to have as my guest today, Dr. Joe Beam. Joe Beam is an internationally known and respected sexologist, author, and expert on love, sex, and marriage. Joe received his Ph.D. from the University of Sydney, and he's the founder and chair of Marriage Helper, which is located in Tennessee near Nashville. Joe has designed and developed courses, workshops, and seminars that are geared towards saving marriages, specifically those that are in crisis. Zane and I have known Joe for decades. And we not only value him as a very dear friend, but we owe much of the fact that we're still married to Joe Beam. We love him. We have the utmost respect for him. He's one of the smartest men that we have ever known. And he is a delight to converse with and listen to. So you're in for a treat today. And I encourage you after the episode to go to the show notes to see all the ways that you can connect with and avail yourself of his resources and workshops, which I cannot recommend enough. So without further ado, I would love to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Joe Beam, to the SavvyCast. Joe, thank you for being here today.
Oh, I'm honored that you invited me. Thank you, Jamie.
Well, Joe, as I have told people before on this podcast, you have been a guest previously, and anyone who knows Zane and me know that we speak so highly of you in regards to your expertise on marriage. We work with young married couples. We often work with couples that are in crisis, and inevitably we end up turning to your resources, whether it's something that we pass along to them or connecting them to one of your workshops. We feel that there's no one who is more knowledgeable about marriage and how to save marriage than you. So thank you for being back to join me on the SavvyCast.
Well, I'm humbled by what you just said, and thank you. And I'm glad we can help.
Yes. Now, Joe, I wanted to, the last time we were at your workshop, it was before COVID. And I don't know that we've conversed since COVID, but a lot happened during that and the lockdown. Has that changed what you do and the state of marriage? How do you see that?
We are seeing research out there that indicates that when people have been locked up together for a long time, that any kind of difficulties or problems they have become exacerbated. And so therefore, marriage trouble has actually increased because people were right in each other's faces all the time. I'm going to work, which meant I went to the next room instead of going away. And so, yes, it has caused some problems without a doubt. And we, even though I had been against doing our workshops online and had fought terribly against our CEO, Kimberly Beam Holmes, she finally convinced me when the pandemic started, we have to start doing your workshop online. So I said, I don't think it'll work. Therefore, I will do it because I don't want somebody else telling me if it works. I want to see for myself. So I did the first 20 of the online versions of our 3-day intensive workshop. And it is just as effective as the in-person workshop. We have figured out a way to make that happen and do that. And so now probably 2/3 of our workshops are being done online. And the interesting thing about that, Jamie, is that now we have people in each workshop from all over the world. It would not be unusual in a workshop to have couples from 7 or 8 different countries. All they have to do is be able to speak English, and some of them on the other side of the world to stay up all night.
Wow. Now, Joe, because, you know, we love your workshops. We've always attended, not done virtually. Is everyone on Zoom?
In the online workshops, yes, and we still do in-person workshops, but yes. But Jamie, you just have to see it to believe it. I doubted it but it works just as well because not only do the lecture part that you're used to, we actually can also do the breakout parts on Zoom. And interestingly, people participate even faster on Zoom than they do in person. So it's fascinating. And it works really
Wow.
well. So yeah, it changed our world that way. And it
Well,
also gave us one other thing we couldn't do before. Because we can do it online now, we will do some workshops for the solo spouse, meaning I want my marriage to be saved, but my spouse is not interested. And we do a 3-day workshop for them. I wouldn't do that with them in person because we've got these hurting people with these hurting people. And
oh, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But doing it online, that works. And we're now doing those. As a matter of fact, I'm doing one this weekend and next weekend, solo spouse workshops online.
Now, when you do a solo spouse workshop, okay, so you're dealing with a spouse whose spouse wants a divorce, they do not. Are
Mhm.
you doing one-on-one or is it a group comprised of people whose spouses want out?
It's a group. It's very similar to the workshop that you attended, except that I can be more direct in the answers because I'm not having to be careful not to offend the reluctant spouse, as we call them. And
Right.
so it's the same lectures, but with a whole lot more questions and answers from the people that come into it. It's really very, very powerful, very effective.
Well, Joe, I want you to come back and have a whole podcast on that. I'm very intrigued. And because you're dealing with the part of the couple that really seems out of control. So I'm curious as to how you equip them and how many marriages do stay together after that.
We don't have any statistics on that yet
Uh-huh.
because we've been doing it for a couple of years, but we are getting tremendous feedback about this is one of the best things I've ever done in my life. And you can't begin to understand how much you have helped me. And so our view is, yes, we want to help save the marriage. That's what we're for.
Mhm.
If, God forbid, that doesn't happen, at
Mhm.
least we have equipped this person to move forward with life. And well, I think there's kind of a principle that like attracts like. And if you're beaten up emotionally and you
Mhm.
feel sorry for yourself, if you want another relationship, what kind of person are you going to attract? Either
Mhm.
somebody like that or a predator who knows how to read that weakness. And so the downside of our solo spouse workshop is if we can't help you save this marriage, which is our goal, we can prepare you for another relationship where you'll know and attract the right kind of person. Now, that's not our purpose, is to set them up for the next marriage. We want to help them save this one. But that's why we're getting such good results from it. Okay, my spouse still wants to go be with his lover or whatever and
Mhm.
has divorced me to be with her, but now I'm better equipped for the future.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. I love that. And also, I bet the people in that group grow extremely close and probably keep up with each other after.
Yeah, if they go to one of our Facebook groups, they can,
Yeah.
because of privacy, we can't give them each other's information.
Oh, right, right. But I know from the groups that we attended, the workshops, we all gave each other our information during the break or whatever. So
Right.
yes.
And they still do that
Privacy.
in the
Yeah.
in-person workshops,
Yes.
but they can't do that in the online workshops.
Okay. Well, and I can't recommend your in person enough. And we will probably come to another. We're doing great, Joe, but we just love
Good.
those workshops. We always leave better. So, well, Joe, I have asked you to talk today about probably the number one cause of divorce. Correct me if I'm wrong. Affairs.
It's the
Is
number one problem we see by far.
okay. And would you say that everyone listening, whether not married, newly married, or married 35, 50 years, that we should all care about why these happen and how to prevent them?
Absolutely. Most of the people that come to our workshop are between 35 and 55. Actually,
Mhm.
I'm sorry, 25 and 55. Let me put that back. But we got people in their 70s. And interestingly, we've had couples in their 70s where one of them is now having an affair with somebody else. So,
Oh,
oh, yeah, interestingly. And we also have couples like in their first year of marriage, they're 23, and one of them's already had an affair with somebody else. So, by far, and based on what we see, it's the number one thing. Yeah.
Joe, do you feel that most people are totally ignorant about affairs, why they start, how to prevent them? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. We kind of classify them, Jamie, into 3 categories. The first category is what we call a short-lived affair. And the short-lived affair is basically about sex. In other
Mhm.
words, it's not developing a relationship with somebody else, it's being in the wrong place at the wrong time. or hanging out with the wrong people, or somebody just gets a wild hair. And the primary thing to help prevent the short-term affair is integrity. The fact that I'm going to be faithful and loyal to my spouse, and I'm going to make sure that I don't let any doors open up through flirting or drinking or whatever else it might be. And we can talk a lot more about that if you wish. The second kind of affair is what is increasing, actually. It's called the allowed affair. Way back in the day, it was called wife swapping, then it was called swinging, then it was called the lifestyle, and now it's got like a whole bunch of different names. Open marriage, polyamory. I mean, it's called a bunch of different things now. And it's being touted as a preferable lifestyle. And more people are trying it. And Jamie, we get people who are very faithful Christians, active in their churches, who participate in that kind of lifestyle. And then they wind up coming to our workshop because the marriage starts falling apart. And then the third kind has to do with relationships. And that's the one that you've heard me teach about so many times, that it doesn't start off with evil intentions, but we let the walls down and get closer and closer. And then one day we realize we've gone too far.
Well, Joe, okay, and I have heard these in workshops. I've heard these three, but I did not know that number two seems crazy to me because, like you, we grew up Christian. My husband's a PK, that kind of thing seems insane, but I know our world has changed. But the fact that you have people in the church engaging in that is mind blowing to me. So what do you think has made them in their minds justify that?
The primary justification has to do with a thing that's actually affecting a lot of parts of Christianity, which is as long as it's done in love, it's okay to do. Now, we hear that about all kinds of sexual things that we don't need to get into right now. But I know the Bible said that was wrong, but that was because it's speaking to people who didn't love, or people who were prostitutes. But any kind of sexual encounter between any two human beings that love each other is okay. And that philosophy is actually being taught by the Bible departments of many Christian universities. Trust me, I know this for a fact.
Oh my goodness!
I mean, this is not hearsay. This is Joe experiencing these things up close and personal. And when you take that philosophy applied to one part of sexuality, which is primarily the big argument and fight now, then it starts applying to the other parts. Like, well, I love you and you love me, and we love other people as well. Why don't we invite Charlie and Samantha over, and because we love them, and therefore it's all okay because it's all full of love. It's actually a result with Christian people. It's a result of the changing theology from Scripture about what is right and what's wrong to what feels right.
Is that what you call deconstructionist Christianity, where you take the Bible and you deconstruct it and try to make it fit your narrative?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And it's rampant. Whole denominations are splitting over this. When it comes to the LGBT kind of thing, whole denominations are splitting over it in that sense. But I'm saying take the same arguments being made there and apply it to marriage. And it's like, well, sure, there's no problem. We love each other. And we love these people. And so there's nothing wrong. And it's all consensual. And my spouse is okay with it. So let's give it a try. Interestingly, a Catholic university did a study and found that in the short term, marriage satisfaction actually increases if you do that in the short term. It's because newness, excitement, that kind of thing. But overall, marriage commitment begins to fail, and then the marriage satisfaction begins to fail because, well, you don't look as pretty as she, or you can't do what he does, or et cetera, et cetera. And then they start getting into relationships with other people, and finally it falls apart. But people will quote the Catholic study, see, it makes marriages better.
But now, do Catholics engage? Do you see?
No. It was a Catholic university where that study was done in Kentucky, and people will cite that and say, "See, it makes the marriage better." Well, look at the long term. Look what it does in the long term. And so, a lot of what's happening with Christian people, now people in the world, it's like this is prevailing. Do what you want to do. Do what makes you happy right now.
Right.
That has become the way of thinking for the world. But in the church, it's that theology that has led to that. And that's why we're seeing more and more people. I mean, Jamie, people that when they walk into the room, you think those are just godly nice, humble people. I can't picture her doing that with some other guy or him. And yet we hear their stories.
Well, I will just say this, Joe. I think I must live in another world or be showing my age, because to me, the fact that that would, number one, happen, but number two, that in a marriage of people like us, just normal, good Christian people who try to do right, but we're sinners, but that you could get, both of you could even get to a conversation with yourselves, first of all, that you would agree to experiment with other people in that way, and that you could get with that you could even find another couple. That is so mathematically incoherent to me.
Well, when you look at the
That may not
research,
be the right term.
when you look at the research about it, Jamie, millions of American couples are participating in this. I'm not talking about other parts of the world right now, just right here in the good old US of A. And it's counterintuitive in the sense that people who are more conservative are more likely to be involved in it than people who are more liberal in their philosophy of life. People in middle America, which is considered a more conservative than either coast, more people in middle America, statistically speaking, than people on the coast, more Republicans than Democrats, more Christians than non-Christians. And so it's counterintuitive when you look at the research thinking, oh, it must be those people. Well, actually, no, it's these folks over here that are more into it. Some of them do it, but more of these people do it.
Mind blowing.
Have I made you bad? I'm sorry, Jamie.
Well, no. I'm just saying, I always learn something new from you, and you are at the forefront of the battles for all of this. So I am assuming that whether in your workshop on live, in person or online, you're seeing a lot of this. That's why you're bringing this up.
Yeah, it's not the number one thing we see in the sense of the polyamory, but infidelity is the number one thing we see.
Okay. Well, then, Joe, I do believe we all should care about this, because it is one of the number one reasons marriages don't make it, which affects many more people than just the couple, children, families. So let's just start. And you've already addressed to whom they happen. They happen to everyone. And the church is not exempt. Christians are no more exempt. Are they any more exempt than the world?
Not as far as we can tell. 94% of the people that come through our workshops identify as Christians. 94%. And sometimes, Jamie, we have 3 workshops going in the same weekend, all of them full.
And what percentage of those couples are there because of an affair?
67%.
Okay.
So we had 996 couples registered for our workshops last year. Okay. Now we do a lot of other things online. So actually we work with thousands of couples, but in the 3-day intensives, we had 996 couples register last year. And about 2/3 of those, the marriage has been affected by an affair, either his or hers or both.
Are you seeing more affairs happen with women, men, or is that hard to gauge?
It's still more with men than women, but it's not as big a difference as you think. Okay. They're in there. Interestingly, there are even websites out there, Jamie, and I wouldn't, maybe I shouldn't even say this because people might go looking for it, but there are websites out there telling single women how to find a married man to have an affair with, where that she doesn't have to have any commitment to him. She can just get her sexual needs fulfilled.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Okay. Well, Joe, for today's purposes, talk to those of us, probably my listeners, the majority of them would have a respect for the word and want to live a Christian life, or even just want to have integrity. Okay. Who may perhaps think it would never happen to me. Maybe some of these young couples that we work with every week, many of them pastors' kids, who think that's for other people. That would never happen to us.
Right.
So that's who I want you to speak to today, and talk about, how does it happen? How does an affair happen?
Okay. To that kind of audience, I would say this first, Jamie, and I'm sure you've referred to this many times. Paul said, when you think you stand, that's when you need to be careful, because that's when you're going to fall. I think what he's saying by that is this: when I think there's no danger, I don't put up any barriers. I don't put up any safeguards, because I think that's not going to happen to me. And I've lived long enough. You know, I'm 149 this year, actually.
Oh goodness.
Somebody asked the other day, why don't you just say 150? Well, that's next year. 140.
You're funny.
And I'm telling you this, I don't care how strong you are. I don't care what your faith is. I don't care what your situation is. If you actually believe there is a devil alive and well on planet Earth and that he has those that serve him, then understand that they study you. Think about a good guy like King David. I mean, we look at him and go, this was a good man. He was a man after God's own heart, but they knew how to get the right temptation in front of him. And so we said to everybody, keep the boundaries, keep the barriers up. You don't think that you're immune to this. And so therefore don't get too close to this person. Jamie, I still won't go to lunch with a female unless Alice approves. This day, it's like, if she's comfortable with me having lunch with her, great. If she's not, I'm not going, because Alice can read who I'm attracted to faster than I can.
Yes.
And I'm sure that most wives can, as a matter of fact. So we look at that and say, okay, so number one, make sure you keep your eyes open. The second thing is when you start looking at what marriage is supposed to fulfill. Well, part of it has to do with relationship. The two become one. Now, there is a sexual dimension to that, and I'll mention that in just a moment. But if you get over to like a book of Ephesians, where the husband loves the wife like Jesus loves the church, and the wife honors and respects her husband, the three primary reasons for divorce, which are also, we're finding, are three of the really common reasons for infidelity. And this is really good research done by secular researchers. People typically want out of a marriage if they feel that you don't love me, or you don't like me, or you don't respect me. It's typically one, two, or all three of those that if I feel that, no matter what you feel toward me, if I feel you don't love me, like me, or respect me, I won't want to be in a relationship with you anymore. And so if in our marriage, we're fulfilling each other emotionally, Alice needs to talk a lot more than I do. So sometimes we'll just sit out on the front porch and Alice will tell me about her day, the last 6 hours, which only takes her like 15, 16 hours to do. So we were...
That's most women. Yeah.
But she needs that, and she needs me to tell her what I think and what I feel. And so if I'm not having that kind of emotional connection with my spouse, it doesn't mean I don't have that kind of emotional need. And you can never tell who out there is going to wind up fulfilling that need without me even realizing it. In other words, we just chat for a while and we start getting a little bit closer, and then it becomes safe and comfortable. And so I open up a little bit more, and then you open up a little bit more, and we're letting our walls down, if you will, and becoming really good friends. And just like, okay, but that's just it. We're friends. But there's another part of us that's in that one flesh thing. In 1 Corinthians 7, it says that we're supposed to fulfill each other sexually as well. And in that context, he says, so that you will not be tempted for your lack of self-control. And so couples, unless it's physically impossible to do, couples should be having a robust sex life with each other to fulfill that sexual need. But what really makes it powerful in one flesh is them connecting emotionally. And so we would say, well, which one comes first? Your father-in-law taught me when I was one of his students, 150 years ago, he taught me that everything that happens outside the bedroom affects what happens inside the bedroom, and everything that happens inside the bedroom affects what happens outside the bedroom. And so if you really want to keep your marriage from ever having an affair, with either one of you having an affair, first of all, keep that guard up always, no matter what. And secondly, work on becoming one emotionally. Understanding each other, listening to each other. And I can give a hint or two about how to do that in a moment. And then understand it's really important. Until you die, it's important to fulfill each other sexually. Now, the sexual needs will decrease over years. Young, newly marrieds might be making love a lot more often than people in their 90s, but it's always there. And so if you pay attention to both those things, it's really important to do both those things. Now, if you want to talk more about how do you develop more emotional closeness, we can talk about that if you wish. And because, I'm a sexologist, we can talk about the other as well, but we might, freak out your audience. Okay.
Well, no, I do want to, because I did open up this to some questions for my Instagram followers.
Okay.
And I had about 4 women, and I know this is so common, and they all indicated they were in their 50s, talk about lack of sexual desire. And one was because she had had chemotherapy. And that, I believe, can affect many things. Sure. And then one has a a child who has a terminal illness, so they're
Mm,
caught up. So there are many reasons
sure,
not related to the spouse that
absolutely.
maybe, and it can be a male too, I'm sure, but not as much. So you have just said that that is so important. We know it's important. What advice do you give to people who want to have a robust sex drive, but for reasons that maybe don't have anything to do with their spouse, they don't?
Okay. There's a slight semantic difference here. Let me point it out. I'm not saying that they should have a robust sex drive. I'm saying a robust sex life. Now, let me explain the difference in those two things. And the Masters and Johnson sexual response cycle, okay, which is the one that's pretty much used by everybody. It used to say it was desire and then arousal, okay, and then plateau and then orgasm and then recovery. What has been discovered, and there's really, they've done this study more with women than anybody else, is that you actually don't have to have desire. Many women don't feel sexual desire until they actually become aroused. In other words, they didn't have the desire first. But
Mhm,
in the process of becoming aroused, the desire comes into place.
mhm,
And so therefore we don't talk about you have to want sex. We're saying, can you have it in a fulfilling way? In other words, when you make love to each other, if you can adequately become aroused, which for most women takes about 20 minutes. But if you can add, and that's why we call it foreplay. If you can become aroused, and then finally you'll reach the plateau, which is the highest level of pleasure just for orgasm, and it'll last 10 to 30 seconds, that will, and then the orgasm itself, and then the recovery. And and therefore, we would say, unless you're having an inability to have arousal, which could happen if you have a child that's dying, like I don't care how much foreplay we have, my mind is so focused on that, I cannot be aroused. But it could be possible that, for example, the lady who went through chemotherapy, okay, I don't have any desire, but if we're slow and romantic and loving, I can get aroused. Then we'd say, okay, even if you don't feel like having sex, if you can enjoy sex, please do. Now, in the case of the one like with the dying child, we'd have to say to that, okay, understand that you still can have contact with each other, preferably sex, because orgasm is a very powerful thing that God built into us. But the oxytocin that we need for bonding can also come from cuddling and hugging and holding each other.
mhm.
And it does not have to necessarily be sexual. And I would assume that if one of our children were dying, to Dallas and I, my nature would be not to want to hug and cuddle because I don't want to be by myself.
Mhm.
Alice's nature would be to want to hug and cuddle.
Yeah.
Well, then I should overcome my nature and do that for her.
Mhm.
So they're not perfect answers,
Yeah.
but it's still the same principle.
Okay. Well, so Joe, just that example alone of those few people that messaged show how many factors come into play with any given couple.
Yes.
So let's just talk about an average couple who maybe is not going through any of these extenuating circumstances, but it's just maybe a man, he goes to work, the woman stays home. Just what boundaries should they have? Or how could an affair happen to this man? He's a churchgoer, he's hardworking, they've got small children. And I probably shouldn't just say man, man or woman.
It could be a man or woman, either one. It's going to be more often the man than the woman, but it definitely happens with a lot of women. And it usually comes about, as I was saying earlier, because we don't have the boundaries up. And we allow ourselves to become too close to people that we shouldn't be close to. And so in this case, let's give an example. Let's say there's a woman in the very next cubicle or the very next office, and they wind up talking at the water cooler, and then they eventually start going to lunch, and people won't talk business all day. My friend Dave Ramsey, now he's got a different building now where this actually doesn't need to happen. But in his previous building, he had a rule that if one woman and one man were in a room by themselves and then they weren't married, one of them had to leave. And
Wow.
yeah,
How
and
does
I
this?
said, why do you do that, Dave? He said, I see it happen all the time. I'm not going to help it. I said, what if they
Wow.
decide to sue you? He said, let them.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I'm impressed.
I
So,
actually heard him say to his employees one time, he said, I'm not afraid of your lawyer. The only one I'm afraid of is Jesus the Christ.
whoa.
Which
No,
I thought,
Dave was that strong. I knew he was a Christian. I know he had that type of
absolutely.
conviction.
And it was like, okay, if we don't have that kind of exposure to each other, now the exposure may not necessarily be in person. In this day and time, emotional affairs can develop quicker online than in person, because online people self-reveal faster.
Mhm.
It's because I can always just go away and you can't find me. And so they tend to let down the walls and open up about what they feel and what they do and what they think. And so an online emotional affair can actually develop much faster than the person working next door to us or in the next office to somebody. And even with the wife. I remember a preacher's wife I dealt with years ago, Jamie, who stopped by to get donuts every morning. And she got to where she started cutting up and chatting with the guy who owned the donut shop. Because she'd get the donuts and take them to work. And it got to where she'd start leaving a little bit earlier so she could still get to work on time, but she stops and winds up talking to the guy who owns the shop. And then eventually one day it's like, hey, we should meet for lunch because we enjoy talking to each other. Well, I don't need to tell the rest of the story. You know where that went.
Mm.
And so it's if you don't have the interaction either in person, online, by phone, texting, whatever, then you're not going to get to the point where this person is emotionally fulfilling you like he or she shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Well, Joe, I know because we've, led many young couples. We're with a very strong group right now, but we have had some in the past when we've talked about boundaries.
Mhm.
Don't go to lunch with the opposite sex, just the two of you. Always have a group.
Mhm.
Don't drive from your office, even a short way, with the opposite sex, unless there's someone else. And we get a lot of pushback or have gotten a lot of pushback on that. And I don't know what it takes for them to understand how really easily, if those things happen over time, that you can get a connection. You're not going to connect with everyone, but I recall you told a story of the business owner and the cologne. Do you recall that story?
Oh yeah. He told me that
You knew him personally,
yeah,
correct?
he's still a friend of mine to this day. He fired his assistant, and I said, "What? You said she's the best assistant you've ever had?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why did you let her go?" And he said, "I started wearing cologne to the office." And I said, "Help me understand this." He said, "I don't wear cologne." And I had to ask myself, "Why am I wearing cologne to the office?" And I realized it was for her. And he's kind of a country boy, although he's very wealthy, kind of a country boy. And he said, "I realized I had gotten on a train that had but one destination. It was either ride it to the end or get off now." So I gave her a huge severance package, a great recommendation, and let her go. Now that's wisdom, but it's wisdom because he had seen it happen to other people.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that I think sometimes is what's happening with your younger folks. Hey, don't you know who we are? We are this generation. We're fine. We're cool.
Mhm.
We're human.
Yeah.
Absolutely human.
And Joe, don't you feel that maybe even the women especially might think, well, my husband's assistant or my wife's tennis coach or whomever, they're not that attractive. Their personality's not great. That would never happen. Why is that not? How many affairs have you seen where you're like, what happened?
Every one of them, actually, when I say what happened.
Yeah.
But we actually worked on a case together a few years ago where the guy was not very handsome and he had a terrible personality, but somehow he attracted women magnetically.
Hmm.
Uh, you just never know what's going to ring somebody's chimes, if you will.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's the bad boy that women want to be around for some reason. Sometimes it's the guy that treats them this particular way. And sometimes, they call this chemistry because it actually is. Sometimes that person triggers chemicals in your brain and you trigger chemicals in his or her brain. And those chemicals draw you together very rapidly. It's what people used to call love at first sight. And anybody on the planet can have that happen. That if the person meets certain criteria, which you won't even know what they are, but if they meet certain criteria, et cetera, instantly you're attracted to each other. My friend, Rick Reynolds, who has affairrecovery.com, he says that every affair partner is less attractive than the spouse. Well, I wouldn't say that because I've seen them where they are more attractive than the spouse, but I understand his point. It's not based on just beauty or money. It's based on fulfilling some kind of need that person has. And believe it or not, Jamie, sometimes that person has a need to punish themselves. I'm rebelling. I feel bad about my decisions in life. And all of a sudden I'm attracted to people I would have never been attracted to before, people I would never want to live with before I want to live with now. And it has to do with my own rebellion happening inside of me. It's actually subconsciously a way to punish yourself.
Well, Joe, let's say someone's listening or watching and they're starting to feel like maybe there's someone to whom they're not married. It's not their spouse. How do you know when you're in the danger zone?
The first time you find that you want to hide anything, like, if Zane were to be thinking, well, Jamie wouldn't understand, and so I'll just not let her know about this. Or Sally's husband wouldn't understand, so let's just don't tell him about this. Or let's meet over here where nobody will see us. Or I'm going to call you in the night, but I can't leave a text because my spouse may. The first time you hide anything, you have already crossed the line. And so I would say the first time you want to hide something, that should be just a big, big danger sign. Big danger sign. The fact that you even consider hiding something. And there's some interesting psychology that commitment to a person, such as my commitment to Alice, begins to weaken if I start daydreaming or fantasizing or contemplating about a different relationship with somebody else. The minute I start thinking about, wow, wonder what it'd be like to be married to her. I wonder what it'd be like if she were my girlfriend. The first time you do that, it weakens the commitment you have to your current spouse.
How do you stop that train once it gets started?
Well, the sooner you stop it, the better. Okay. The sooner you stop it. Like, wow, that's a danger thing. I better get out of that. And if you can have somebody who is wise that you can talk to, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and you know that AA is one of those things I really recommend. One power of AA is you have a sponsor. And when you find yourself wanting to drink, you call the sponsor. And he or she, like women and men will meet you at the Waffle House or something, and you have a cup of coffee. The first time, if you have somebody who is not going to just beat you up verbally, like, how dare you?
A safe place.
Yeah, exactly. But not so safe that it's like, well, I understand. I have those kind of
Right.
symptoms myself. But somebody who look at you and go, I do understand. Okay, now how do we stop this?
Right. Right.
That person.
A safe place that's for your marriage. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, Joe, I would venture to say, I know you probably know, that a lot of these potential affairs, these sticky situations, are with people who work together, or maybe whether they may be on ministry staff together. How do you stop that? You see each other every day.
We've actually encouraged people to quit their jobs. Like, if that's how strong an appeal that person has to use, if that pull is that strong, then you need to be someplace else. Or she or he needs to be someplace else. But typically you're the one that gets to decide that. And we've actually encouraged people. I even helped one couple move to a different city one time. It's like, I just can't let go of what these feelings I have about her. Okay, then let's get you to move someplace else. And I know that sounds draconian and it sounds crazy and all those kinds of things, but flee youthful lust. That's another thing from Paul, from the King James. So that's got to be right. Run away from those things. And so I would say, find somebody you can talk to who's good and strong and spiritual. And then sometimes you just have to make sacrifices, like the man I was talking about. I get on the train. It's either get off now or ride it to the end. And getting off now is the way to do it. Otherwise, whole lot of damage.
Joe, of people who have affairs who don't stop the train, good people, they don't stop the train, the affair happens. How long, how did the majority of those end up? Do the affairs usually break up the marriage? And does the person marry their lover, or does it usually just end in all sorts of carnage on both sides?
There is all sorts of carnage. But very few people who leave a spouse for a lover wind up marrying that lover. You see this thing that we call it limerence, and we've talked about it before and don't have time to explain it now, but it actually has a cycle. And according to research, it's somewhere between 3 months and 48 months, typically it's going to last, which means about 24 months is about when half of them are over anyway. I've only worked with 4 or 5 in the last 30 years that went past 36 months. A few do, but it's exceptionally rare. So it's going to end. And typically what that means is that before they wind up marrying the other person, the limerence begins to fade for one of them. And so most of them don't ever marry the lover that they're going to leave their spouse for. The ones that do marry the lover that they left their spouse for or leaving the spouse for have a divorce rate of over 80%. Because they later kind of like, what in the world did I do? Look at all the things I lost. Look at all the things, all the people I hurt. And they tend to take a lot of blame themselves, but they also blame the lover. If it had not been for you, this would not have happened.
Mhm.
And so is it possible that they might wind up marrying each other, might stay together? Yeah, but the odds are very strongly against that. Can a marriage be put together back after an affair? The answer is yes. Now, we get a lot of pushback on that, Jamie. We have certain websites, well, I'll just leave it at that, who will sometimes pull our marketing because they're saying you shouldn't help people get back together after an affair. And we have seen tremendously strong marriages when people get past it, not because they had the affair, but because of what they learned about
Mhm.
themselves, about each other, about relationships. And it's almost, if not almost every marriage can be salvaged,
Mhm.
can be put back together and made good in the future. It can. We see it. We've been doing this since 1994. So
Mhm.
what's that, 28 years?
Mhm.
And we know we've worked with thousands.
Well, Joe, if there is a marriage that has fallen prey to an affair and the husband or the wife is penitent and they're sorry and they're honest, is that very likely to survive more than one who is caught and sorry they got caught, but they say, well, okay, I'm going to work on it?
Both of them have a good chance of success. Well, here's the potential difference. If the one that's caught is like, okay, I shouldn't have done it. Let's move on. Let's not deal with this. Let's not do what we need to do. Then the possibility of it occurring again absolutely is there.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I would say for either one, if they will stop and say, let's get the help we need to do what we need to do to repair what needs to be repaired, then both of those have great success framing a good marriage in the future. It's the ones that don't deal with it that have the likelihood of it happening again.
Okay. So the sooner it's brought to light and the sooner it's worked on. And then, Joe, for all of those who want to follow up with resources, I'm going to list everything in the show notes. But can you just give us a snippet of this type of, or how often your workshops are offered? And how they should determine whether they choose in person, or like we drove several hours to Nashville because I like the in-person experience. But tell us about, just very briefly, what to
Okay.
expect.
Well, to find out more about it, if you go to Marriage Helper, that's Marriage Help marriagehelper.com, you'll see a tab for workshop. Click the workshop and it gives you all kinds of information. Plus, you have a way there you can fill in your information and one of our client representatives will contact you back. Now, they're not counselors, they're not therapists. They'll listen to enough of your problem to help you so they can understand what's going on. And then if we have a resource that'll help you, they can direct you to whichever one that is, because we have a bunch of different resources. When it comes to the deciding about the workshop, the in-person workshop is more expensive because it costs us a lot more to do.
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
Okay. And we typically do those here in the Nashville, Tennessee area.
Mhm.
The in-person workshops have their own value. As a matter of fact, I went to
Mhm.
one last weekend and it was really very good. And I like it as well. Jimmy, I like it too.
Mhm.
The in-person is less expensive to begin with because it doesn't cost us as much money to do. Plus, you don't have airfare. You don't have hotels.
You mean, Joe, you just said, you mean the online,
Thank you, Jamie. I see
okay.
I'm
No,
140.
that's okay, because I've thrown a lot of questions at once. So the online is going to be less expensive
It's expensive. First of all, the
naturally.
fee is
Mhm.
less expensive. And then secondly, the saving of money is massive because you do it from your own home. And we do have scholarships available for people who need it for the online one. Because again, we don't have as much money we have to actually spend. And scholarship's not based on just wanting a discount. Scholarship is based on genuine financial need. On
Mhm.
average, Jamie, we offer $20,000 in scholarships per month.
Oh my. And I will say to those listening who love to give and help others, Zane and I have sent many people, and because we feel like the payoff is huge. from an eternal perspective, from just a marriage, socioeconomic, but you do recommend, and I believe this as well, that they have a little skin in the game.
Oh, absolutely. We have discovered that the people that tend not to participate are people who have nothing in it. It's
Yeah,
like, no, surely you can afford something.
right.
Right. You need skin in the game, and that gets you committed to it, those kinds of things. But again, in the online one, for those who are truly with financial need, and this is all around the world, Jimmy, we do this for people in India, I mean, and as well as America. We'll have scholarships if you have the financial need. And like I said, about $250,000 a year we give away in scholarships.
Well, that is wonderful. And I can attest from having attended numerous, they're wonderful. And there's really nothing like them that I've seen or heard of. But Joe, I thank you. There's so much we could sit here for hours because there's so much to talk about. But I think that you've touched on a lot of things that hopefully people will have a good takeaway, and hopefully this will help some people put up some boundaries.
I hope
Yeah.
so. I hope so. Always a pleasure to talk to you, Jamie. You're very insightful. Very.
Well, Joe, thank you. And we love and appreciate you. And Alice, give her my best.
I shall. Thank you.